Hello friends and welcome back to the course. In this video, we will take a quick look at history of Java. Let's start the Java story. In the year 1991, Sun Microsystems put together a small team of its top engineering minds to explore opportunities in consumer electronics. This team comprised of James Gosling, Patrick Norton, Mike Sheridan, and was called the Green Team. By that time, Sun was already leading the workstation computer market. By the way, a workstation is a computer with a faster processor and much more RAM compared to a personal computer. They are used as server machines, enabling multiple users to log into the system at the same time. Okay, coming back to 1991. Consumer electronics was the new hot upcoming big market at that time, and Sun wanted to make some early inroads into that market. Green Team was tasked to develop a technology that will enable Sun to dominate the consumer electronics space. Led by James Gosling, whose picture is on the screen right now, in the next 18 months, this team worked tirelessly to create a new programming language which they called Oak. This was later renamed to Java in 1995. The name was changed because a different programming language with the name Oak already existed. To avoid a name conflict, the language was renamed to Java after coffee cultivating islands of Java in Indonesia. Originally, Java was created for writing software to be embedded in various electronic devices like microwave ovens, remote controls, set-top box for TVs, etc. Different manufacturers were using different processors as controllers for these devices. Softwares for such devices needed additional work for each manufacturer to properly compile and run on the specific manufacturer's device. Java aimed to address this pain point and promised a write once, run anywhere solution. Software written in Java is platform independent and can be run on any device without any additional work. Despite all this, it didn't get much love from the consumer electronics space. Throughout 1993, the team tried very hard but couldn't find any customers for their new technology. Probably it was too advanced and ahead of its time for the consumer electronics and interactive television industry. About the same time, a second and ultimately more important factor was emerging that would play a crucial role in the future of Java. It was the World Wide Web, more commonly known as the Internet. Internet is made up of numerous computer systems differing in their CPUs and operating systems connected in a network of interacting machines. To evolve as a highly interactive medium, Internet needed lots of portable software which can be downloaded from the server and run on user's computer without the need of any additional changes. The team refocused Java to Internet programming on the World Wide Web. On 23rd of May 1995, Sun Microsystems made the first public release of Java. With the explosion of World Wide Web, Java found huge success and became one of the dominant technologies of the Internet. So, that's a quick look at Java's story, starting from its humble beginnings to the juggernaut it has become today. In the next video, let's take a closer look at platform independence and try to understand how Java changed the game with its write once, run anywhere promise. So far, we have seen that platform independence and write once, run anywhere promise made Java a huge hit for Internet programming. So, how does Java achieve this cross-platform portability for its programs? The magic lies in Java's bytecode and Java Virtual Machine, which is more popularly referred to by its initials JVM. But in order to understand bytecode and JVM, we first need to understand how programs are compiled and executed. The single most important component of any computer is the CPU, commonly referred to as the processor. A processor only understands binary digits, that is 0 and 1. For the processor to perform any computation, we need to give the instructions and data as a sequence of zeros and ones. This binary sequence that a processor understands is known as its machine language. Machine language is made up of instructions and data that are all binary numbers. Machine language of a processor differs from vendor to vendor. What it means is that processors made by Intel will have a different machine language from processors made by AMD and so on. Each processor manufacturer will have a specific machine language for a family of processors. As you can see, for a human, it is very tough to write a program in machine language. To overcome this limitation, computer scientists invented assembly language. Instructions in assembly language are given in English-like words, so it is more friendly to humans than machine language. A program known as assembler will take the assembly language code as input and convert it into machine language that the processor understands. Although assembly language is an improvement over machine language, still it is processor specific, and writing and debugging any moderately complex program in it is very time intensive. As computer became smaller, more powerful, and more reliable, there was a huge demand for software that is reusable and easy to maintain and modify. This led to the invention of high-level languages like COBOL, Pascal, C, C++, etc. High-level languages have a very much English-like syntax, so they are easily understandable by humans. Programs written in high-level languages are processor independent. No modifications to the source code are required to execute it on different types of computers. This makes high-level languages highly desirable for developing reusable, maintainable software. Now remember, our processor still loves its zeros and ones. It doesn't understand anything other than machine language. So, the program written in high-level language needs to be converted into machine language. This is done by a program called the compiler. This entire process of converting high-level code to machine code is called compilation. The output of compilation process is an executable file that can run our program on the computer. So, how does high-level language code maintain portability across platforms? Even before we try to figure out the answer to this question, let's first understand what the term platform means here. In a personal computer, you don't directly execute your program on the processor. The computer has a specialized software called operating system running on it, which acts as a bridge between our programs and the processor. I'm very sure you're not hearing the term operating system or OS for the first time. A combination of operating system plus the processor is called the platform. Windows OS running on machines with Intel processors is one of the most common platforms in the world. Other common platforms are Linux and Intel, Mac OS X and Intel, and PowerPC. Coming back to the original question of how high-level language code is portable across platforms. The key here is the compiler. The compiler for each platform is different. Windows will have its own compiler. Linux will have its own compiler. Mac OS X will have its own compiler, and so on. So, if you have developed a software which you want people to install and use on different platforms like Windows, Linux, and Mac, you will take the program and compile it using the compiler of each of the platform that you want to support. Let's say this is your program. You will compile it using the Windows compiler and you will get an executable file which will run the program on Windows. Similarly, you will compile your program with Linux and Mac compilers and get two more executables for Linux and Mac platforms respectively. Now you will have three executable files for each of Windows, Linux, and Mac. You will put up all the three files on your website. Depending on their platform, users will download and install the appropriate executable. You cannot take an executable file generated by a compiler for Windows and run it on a Linux system. It will not execute. Next, we will look at a concrete example which will demonstrate this concept of providing separate executables for different platforms. Firefox is a popular web browser which can be used on multiple platforms. Let's see how it is distributed. This is the download page of Firefox browser. Here's a link providing install options for other platforms. Let's go to this link. Here you can find options to install Firefox on Windows 64-bit, Mac OS, and Linux. There are also options for 32-bit Windows and Linux. Each of these options is a platform that Firefox web browser supports, meaning you can run Firefox on this platform. Each of these links point to an executable file which has been compiled using the compiler for that specific platform. Let's download Firefox for Windows 64-bit and try to install it. Windows executable is downloaded. I will try to open it now. It starts executing to install Firefox on my machine. As my machine is running Windows and the executable I downloaded was for Windows, everything works fine. I will cancel this installation. Now let's download Firefox for Mac OS and try to install it. Mac OS executable is downloaded. I will try to open it. I am presented with a dialog asking me how to open this file. As this file is for Mac OS, Windows doesn't recognize it, so it doesn't know what to do with it. In such scenarios, Windows asks the user to help it open the file. So we just saw that Windows was unable to open an executable file compiled with the compiler for Mac OS, but it successfully opened the executable file which was compiled with compiler for Windows. I hope now you have a good understanding of how programs written in high-level languages are platform independent and what is the process for supporting multiple platforms for your program. This understanding is essential to appreciate how Java is advancing the concept of portability. With high-level languages like C++, even though you don't need to write your code again for a different platform, but additional works in terms of compilation is required to run it on a different platform. You also need to maintain different executables for all the different platforms you want your program to run on. Java solves this exact problem with bytecode and JVM. In Java, the executable you get after compilation will work across platforms. No additional work needed. No need to maintain multiple executables for different platforms. You can compile your Java program on Windows and take the executable that you get as the output to Linux or Mac. The exact same executable will work on Linux and Mac too. Sounds like magic, isn't it? Now let's try to demystify this magic by understanding the science behind it. The output of a Java compiler is not an executable file, but a file containing bytecode. You can consider bytecode as a close relative of machine code. Like machine code, it is highly optimized and not human readable, but unlike machine code, the platform cannot understand and execute it. The cool thing about bytecode is that it is the same for all platforms. Bytecode is understood by Java Virtual Machine or the JVM. JVM is a software that needs to be running on the computer where you want to execute your Java program. JVM takes the bytecode as input, converts it into the machine code of the specific platform it is running on and executes it. Consider JVM as a virtual platform running on the actual platform. Let's see how we can support multiple platforms for our Java program. We give our Java program as input to the Java compiler. The output of the compiler is the equivalent bytecode of our Java program. Remember, bytecode is not machine code. It cannot be executed directly on the target machine. We need some program running on the target machine which can understand this bytecode and convert it into machine code which the target machine can then execute. This program is the JVM or Java Virtual Machine. As you would have guessed by now, JVM is platform specific. Each platform has its own JVM. There is a JVM for Windows, a different JVM for Linux, and yet another JVM for Mac. This JVM needs to be installed on the target machine before we can run any Java program on it. Although the details of JVM will differ from platform to platform, they all understand the same Java bytecode. Once a JVM is available for a platform, any Java program can run on it without any modification. This is how Java achieves its magic of platform independence and provides write once, run anywhere capabilities. Now that we have discussed object-oriented concepts and have developed some basic familiarity with Java, we are ready to look at our first Java program. This is a short and simple Java program which prints Hello Java on the console. Although this program is quite short, it includes several key features that are common to all Java programs. We will go through the program line by line and understand key features of Java programs. Don't worry if you get confused and don't understand all the things in this program. This is just an overview of the concepts which will help us to get started. We will discuss these concepts in detail in subsequent lectures. With that out of the way, let's dive into our first program. These lines at the start of the program are a comment. Comments are ignored by the compiler. Comments are most commonly used by the programmers to document their code. Think of comments as notes that you can write in the source code of your program. You can use comments to explain the logic of your code. It will help anyone who is reading the code to better understand it. That anyone includes you as well. 6 months after writing your code, you will come back to make some changes to it, and you will wonder whether this code was written by you. These comments will help you recollect your reasoning for writing the code the way it is. Java provides 3 types of comments. This one is a multi-line comment. It starts with a / and an asterisk, and ends with the asterisk and /. Anything between these two comment symbols constitutes the text of the comment and is ignored by the compiler. As the name suggests, a multi-line comment can be several lines long. Moving on to the next line, it begins with the keyword class. The class keyword tells the compiler that a new class is being defined. Hello Java is an identifier that is the name of the class. The complete class definition, including all its members, are enclosed between the opening and closing curly braces. In Java, all programs start with a class. No program activity occurs outside classes. We will take a closer look at identifiers and spend a lot of time on classes later in the course. Let's go to the next line. This is a single line comment. It begins with a double / and ends at the end of the line. You can use multi-line comments for longer descriptions and single-line comments for brief line-by-line explanation of code. We have now seen 2 types of comments, single-line and multi-line. The third type of comment is known as documentation comment. Moving on, the next line begins with the main method. As the name suggests, main method is main entry point to your program. Program execution begins with the main method. Java is case sensitive, so the word main needs to be written exactly as it is shown here. If you change the case of main, then Java will consider it as a normal method, not the main entry point to your program, due to which your program may fail to run. The public keyword is an access modifier. It controls the visibility of class members. Class members which are declared as public, meaning class members which are preceded by the public keyword, may be accessed by code outside the class in which they are declared. The main method needs to be declared as public because it will be called by code outside of its class when the program is started. Next comes the keyword static. When a method inside a class is declared as static, it can be called without creating the object of that class. Main method needs to be declared as static because it will be called by the Java virtual machine to start the program even before any object of the class Hello Java can be created. Methods can return a value. In Java, method needs to explicitly state in their definition what kind of value they are going to return. Will they return a number, or will they return a string, or will they not return anything at all? The main method is not going to return anything, which it tells the compiler through the keyword void in its definition. You can pass information to methods in the form of variables. These variables are specified inside the set of parentheses that follow the name of the method. These variables are called parameters of the method. Main method accepts one parameter named args, which is an array of strings. You must be wondering, what is this array of strings? What does it even mean? and who supplies values for args parameter. This is a relatively advanced concept to explain in this overview. You need to have some understanding of arrays and command line arguments to understand this. For now, you can ignore this. We won't be using args in the next set of programs that we write. And I promise to you that I will explain this once we have covered arrays. Next is the opening curly brace, which starts the body of main method. All code of the method is enclosed within its opening and closing curly braces. Moving on to the next line, it prints Hello Java with 3 exclamation marks on the screen by using the built-in method println. The println method prints the string passed to it on the screen followed by a new line, so that the next output on the screen is printed on the next line. The line begins with system.out. System is a predefined class of the Java standard library that provides access to the system, and out is the output stream that is connected to the screen. Don't worry if the last sentence I said didn't make any sense to you. Just remember that we use system.out.println method to output some string on the screen. The next two closing curly braces mark the end of main method and Hello Java class respectively. That brings us to the end of our first Java program. In case you are feeling that you didn't understand all the things in the overview of this program and are not comfortable with it, don't worry. It is perfectly fine to feel that way at this stage. After all, we have just looked at our first Java program. We have the entire course ahead of us to dive deeper into each of these concepts and understand them properly. So, congrats on your first Java program. You should feel happy about it. I will see you in the next video where we will learn how to execute this program in BlueJ. Bye for now. Hello friends and welcome back. In this video, we will get to know BlueJ IDE and execute our Hello Java program with it. But wait, did I just say IDE? Do we know what it means? Probably not. So before moving to BlueJ, I will quickly explain what an IDE is. IDE is short form for Integrated Development Environment. What an axe is to a woodcutter, what a gun is to a soldier, what a plow is to a farmer, the same is IDE to a software developer. Sounds quite dramatic, isn't it? Okay, enough of melodrama on my part. Coming back. So basically an IDE is a software application which helps the software developer to write code and then compile, test and debug it. You can develop softwares without IDE also. You can write code in any text editor like Notepad or Sublime. Then write commands on the command prompt or terminal to compile the program and then write some more commands to execute it. If you encounter any error during compilation or testing, you need to redo the whole process again. This is where IDEs shine. They help developers save time by simplifying all this process so that it can be done by just clicking a button or two. Typically, an IDE provides a code editor, debugger, and compiler all in one. So, by using an IDE, you don't need to switch across multiple tools. You can be super efficient by managing all your development related activities in a single tool. Java has some very powerful and mature IDEs. The two most popular Java IDEs are Eclipse and IntelliJ IDEA. But these IDEs are more suitable for professional software development. They have tons of features to boost developer productivity. All these features make them quite complicated. As a beginner software developer, they will overwhelm you with all their complexity and you will end up learning the tool more than learning the language. So, for these reasons, ICSE has prescribed BlueJ as the IDE to use for teaching computer applications. BlueJ is an IDE designed specifically for beginners. As you will see, it is very simple and interactive. It has negligible learning curve. You will get started with it fairly quickly. With the context for IDE set, now let's go to BlueJ and see it in action. In Windows 10, you can search for BlueJ here. If BlueJ is installed, you will see this icon. You can click on this icon to launch it. Given that we will be using BlueJ a lot in this course, searching for it each time we want to launch it may not be very efficient. A better option will be to pin it to taskbar so that the launch icon is available whenever we need it. To do so, right-click on the icon and select Pin to Taskbar. BlueJ's icon is added to the taskbar. Clicking this icon will launch BlueJ. This is BlueJ main window. This is how it will look when you open it for the first time. In subsequent launches, it will open the project that you were working on previously. You start by creating a new project in BlueJ. A project is a collection of Java classes that constitute your software application. So, if you are building a student's marks management application to record the marks of all the students in your class, that will be one project. While at the same time, if you are building a cool game using Java, then that will be a separate project. To create a project, you go to the project menu and select New Project like this. The New Project dialog pops up. Give the name of the project as First Java Program. For location, navigate to the folder where you want to save your project. I will save it in C:\knowledge boat, comp apps, BlueJ. Click on select folder and then click on OK. BlueJ has created our first Java program project. The name of the project is shown in the title bar. Let's go to the location we specified for our project. I will open File Explorer and go to C:\knowledge boat, comp apps, BlueJ. Here you can see that a folder with our project's name is created. This folder represents our first Java program, BlueJ project. Let's open this folder. There are a couple of files here, package.bluej and readme.txt. This package.bluej file is the project file. It contains information related to the project and is used by BlueJ. Readme.txt is a text file provided by BlueJ to add documentation for our project. BlueJ provides a handy way to work with the README file. Let's go back to the main window to see it. This icon here represents the README file that we saw just now in the project folder. You can open it by double-clicking on it. Here, you can add the details and additional notes about your project, like project title, purpose of the project, etc. This is just a template provided by BlueJ to help us document our project. You can change the contents of this README in any way you want. This is just a text file provided by BlueJ to hold the documentation of your project. Let's close this and go back to the main window. Next, we are going to add a new class to our project. For adding a new class, either you can click this New Class button, or you can go to the Edit menu and select New Class. I will use the New Class button. This opens the New Class dialog. Enter the name of your class. Remember, we named our class Hello Java in our first program. Select language as Java, class type as class, and hit OK. Our newly created class is added to our project. Let's switch to the folder containing our project. This is the file that contains the source code of our Hello Java class. The Java compiler requires that a source file should use .java filename extension. As you can see here, our source file has .java extension. Coming back to the main window, did you notice these stripes present on our Hello Java class icon? These stripes tell us that the class has not been compiled yet. Once we compile the class, the stripes will go away. But before we can compile the class, we need to add some meaningful code there. To add code, you need to open the class, which is done by double-clicking on the class icon like this. There is another way to open the class. Let me close the class to show you the other way. right-click on the class icon and select Open Editor option. That will also open the class. Both ways are equivalent. Use whichever way you prefer. The class already contains some code. This is the skeletal code of the class that's generated automatically by BlueJ to save some amount of your time and effort. This default code is syntactically correct. It will compile but won't do much. Let's examine this code. There are some comments asking us to provide the description, author and version of our class. Then our class definition begins. It contains a private member variable x of type integer. Here is the constructor which assigns x the value of 0. Then there is this public method named sample method which accepts a integer parameter y, adds it to the member variable x and returns the result. All this code is not much useful to us at this point. Our first program is even simpler than this. So I will remove all this code and enter the code of our first program. I will speed up the video for the part where I am entering the program to help you save some time. Okay, I am back with our Hello Java class coded. Let's save it by going to class and selecting save. Alternately, you can use the shortcut Ctrl+S to save the code. BlueJ automatically saves your work whenever you compile the code or when you close the editor, so it is very unlikely that you might lose your changes even if you don't explicitly save your work. Nevertheless, it is always a good idea to save your work explicitly. You can compile the code of your class by clicking this compile button. You can also compile your class by right-clicking on the class icon in the project window and selecting compile like this. Both ways are equivalent. You can use whichever you like. Notice that there is also a compile button here. You can use this too. This will also compile your code. There is just one difference between this and the previous options. Clicking this button will compile all the classes in your project. This is a very handy way to compile all your classes by clicking just a single button. Did you notice that the stripes on our Hello Java class icon are gone now? That's because we have successfully compiled our class. Now let's see what happens if our code has compilation errors. I will deliberately introduce an error. I have misspelled public in the definition of the main method. Let's see what happens when we compile the class. Notice that the pattern of stripes changed on the class icon in the main window. This indicates to the user that the class didn't compile successfully. Let's go back to the class. The line where the error occurred is marked out. If I take my cursor to the line, a message pops out explaining the reason for the error. The error message is not very helpful though. It is complaining about identifier declaration syntax being incorrect. At the bottom of the window, there are also some messages informing us about the error. Let me fix the error and get the class to compile again. So now all's good, our class compiles, there are no stripes on the icon in the main window. As we are on the topic of compilation, I just want to take you back to the bytecode lecture. Remember this Java compilation overview from that lecture? Let's connect the dots here by relating this theory to the actual compilation of our Hello Java class. We learned that Java compiler takes Java program as input and generates the bytecode from it. We just compiled our Hello Java class. Let's go to the project folder and see what all files we have. There is a new class, hellojava.class, which was not there previously. This is the bytecode of our Hello Java class generated by the Java compiler. Just to make sure you understand it, I will repeat the compilation once again. I will delete hellojava.class file and again compile our Hello Java class. Before recompiling, let me reopen BlueJ. Currently, there are no stripes on the class icon. Let's reopen BlueJ and see. Wow, The stripes are back on the class icon indicating that Hello Java is not yet compiled. I deleted hellojava.class file. As BlueJ is not able to find the bytecode, it is rightly indicating that the class is not compiled. Let's compile it now and also keep the project folder opened in File Explorer. hellojava.class file is now created containing the bytecode of our class. This bytecode will be executed by the JVM to run our program. We can take this hellojava.class file to a machine running Mac and it will run fine there too without needing any modifications. I wanted to talk to you about the file naming requirements in Java. There are a few interesting things there and now is a good time to discuss it. We have already seen that Java source code files need to have an extension of .java. Another thing to notice here is that the name of the file containing source code of our class and our class name are same. This is not a coincidence. Unlike other programming languages where you can give any name to the source file, in Java, the name of the source file is very important. The best practice in Java is to name the source code file with the same name as the class it contains. The reasoning behind this best practice is that no matter what you name your source code file, the .class file that is generated by the compiler will always have the class name as its file name and .class as its file extension. Taking the example of hellojava.class, the name hellojava is coming from the class hellojava and .class is the extension that the Java compiler gives the bytecode file. By giving the source code file the same name as the class it contains, you get a .java file and a .class file with the same name. This helps to avoid confusion as to which is the source file related to a .class file. As you see here, we can very easily correlate the .class file corresponding to this .java file. I said that naming your source code file after the class it contains is a convention or a best practice. Keep in mind that there are certain cases where this becomes necessary and is mandated by the compiler. Your class will not compile unless you name the file same as your class. In those scenarios, it is also very important to remember that Java is case sensitive. So, not just your file name and class name should be the same, they should exactly match the case too. Now, what are the scenarios when this becomes mandatory? That we will see later in the course. With the class compiled, now is the time we all have been waiting for. Finally, we will see our program running. Let's switch back to the main window and open the class. Remember, we declared main function static by writing the keyword static before its definition. Due to this, we don't need an object of class hellojava to execute the main method. We will directly execute it from the class. But this will change from the next program onwards. Then we need to first create an object of the class and use that object to execute the methods. Don't worry about it now. I will show you how to do that when we look at our next program. For now, let's go ahead and execute the main method. For this, go back to the main window, right-click on the class icon and select the main method. It asks for argument of main method. This is the array of strings variable args that I ask you to ignore. So, keeping my promise, we will not give anything here and just click OK. And there it is, the output of our program in the terminal window of BlueJ. It has printed the words Hello Java with 3 exclamation marks on the console window. Congrats on executing your first Java program. Now, let's close the console window and execute the program again. Notice that the output of previous execution is still there. By default, BlueJ will not clear it for the next execution. You can manually clear it by going to Options and then selecting Clear. BlueJ also provides an option to do this automatically so that you don't have to manually clear the screen before every execution. It is this Clear Screen at method call option. Let's select this and execute the program. I will execute it again. The second execution started with a blank window as we have selected the clear screen option. Let me unselect this option and execute the program a couple of times. BlueJ also provides an option to save the contents of console window to a file. To do this, click on the Options menu and select the Save to File menu item. I will name it first program output.txt. Location is the same as the project folder location. You can give any location you want. Click on Save to save the file. Let's go to the location where we saved the file. Here is the file containing the output from the console window. You can open it with any text editor and see the contents of the file. Let's close this and go back to the main window. Okay, with that, we have written, compiled and executed our first Java program. I will suggest you try all the steps that I have shown in the video on your own and play around with BlueJ. The key to becoming a successful software developer is practice and trying things on your own. The more you practice it, the more confident you will become. We will just look at a few more things in BlueJ before wrapping up this video. Next, we will see how to close a project in BlueJ. Closing a project is very simple. Go to the Project menu and select the menu item Close. To open a project, go to Project menu, select Open Project, navigate to the project and click on Select Folder. This will open the project. BlueJ can open all Java source files and packages, whether they are created with BlueJ or not. To demonstrate opening non-BlueJ files, I have a source file containing a Java class in this non-BlueJ folder. Note that there is no package.bluej file present in this folder. Hence, it is not a BlueJ project. To open it with BlueJ project, go to the main window. From the project menu, select Open non-BlueJ. Navigate to the location of the project. In this case, it is non-BlueJ folder. And then click on Select Folder. The file successfully opened in BlueJ. One important point to note here is that the first time you open a non-BlueJ Java source file, BlueJ will create a package.bluej file there, so it will become a BlueJ project. Next time you will open it like a regular BlueJ project. Going back to the non-BlueJ folder, see package.bluej is created now. This is no longer a non-BlueJ project. Now it can be opened like a regular BlueJ project. With this, we have come to the end of this video. I hope you have a good understanding of BlueJ by now. With some practice, you will get comfortable using BlueJ. Thanks for watching and I will see you in the next video. In this video, we will look at our second Java program. This program will introduce us to variables and a few new ways to write output to the console window. Let's look at the program. Go to Project, select Open Project. I want to open this project second program. It has a class named Hello variable. Let's see what's inside this class. This class contains a public method multiply by 2, which takes no arguments and returns no value. Notice that multiply by 2 is not marked static and there is no main method in Hello variable class. So, in order to execute multiply by 2 method, we will need an object of Hello variable class. We will see how to create that object a little later. Before that, we will go through the program and try to understand it. The first line of multiply by 2 method declares an integer variable named number. Variables are at the core of any meaningful program. You can think of variables as containers that hold information. Your program can change the information in these containers as needed. These containers are basically memory locations that hold some value. This value represents the information stored in that memory location. The memory location is given a name, and this name is used to access that memory location in your program. In Java, you first need to declare a variable before using it. The syntax for variable declaration is type followed by the variable name followed by a semicolon. Java defines several data types like integer, character, and floating point. The variable number is of type integer, as specified by the keyword int at the beginning of its declaration. We will discuss data types and variables in detail in a later video. This is just a brief introduction to get us started. In the next line, we assign a value of 50 to our variable number. Moving on to the next line, it prints the string the value of number is 50 to the console. Notice the use of plus to join this string with the value of number. You can use the plus operator to join as many items you want within a single println statement and output the resultant string to the console. Next line multiplies the value of number by 2 and assigns it back to number. The current value of number is 50. 50 multiplied by 2 gives 100. This result 100 is assigned back to the variable number, so when this line is executed, the value of number changes from 50 to 100. The next line uses print method of system.out to print this string to the console. Print method is like println method with one difference. It does not output the new line character after every call. What this means is that the next output that is printed on the console will start on the same line rather than starting on the next line. The next line uses println method to print the value of number on the screen. So 100, which is the current value of number, gets printed to the console. Notice that the number is used by itself while calling the println method. Both print and println methods can print the value of any of Java's built-in types. This is a simple program which uses a variable to multiply its value by 2 and assign it back to the variable. Let's execute the program and see whether the output comes as per our expectations or not. Go back to the main window and compile the class. The class compiled successfully without any errors. As I said before, to execute multiply by 2 method, we will first need to create an object of hello variable class. Right-click on the hello variable class and select this option, new hello variable. This dialog is asking for a name of this object. You can give any name of your choice, but it should be a valid identifier. I will go with the name suggested by BlueJ, HelloVar1, and hit OK. The newly created object appears at the bottom of the window. The name you specified is written on the object. It is followed by a colon and then the class name to which this object belongs. This helps to easily identify your object when multiple objects are present. Right-click on the object, select the method multiply by 2 and it gets executed. As multiply by 2 doesn't take any arguments, so BlueJ didn't show any dialog for entering the arguments and directly executed the method. As you can see, the output is exactly as we discussed when we were going over the program. Let's open the class and correlate the output with the code. This first println statement prints the first line of output on the console. As println also prints a new line, the output of next print statement starts on the next line. This print statement prints this part of the line. As the print statement doesn't print a new line, the output of next println statement starts on the same line. It prints the value of number as 100 on the same line, and with this, execution of the program completes. Next, we will briefly look at two control statements, the if statement and the for loop. A basic knowledge of these is needed to understand some of the concepts which I will be discussing next. This is just a quick overview. Later in the course, there is a dedicated section for control statements where we will spend a good amount of time to understand control statements in depth. In the two programs you have seen so far, you would have noticed that when the program is run, its statements are executed from top to bottom in the order in which they are written. The order in which the statements of a program are executed is known as control flow or flow of control. Most of the times you will want to alter the control flow to suit the needs of your program. You might want to skip some set of statements based on some condition while repeating some other set of statements. Programming languages provide statements to alter the control flow of the program, and these statements are known as control statements. When you need to make a decision in your program, you will use the if statement. It executes a certain section of code only if a test evaluates to true. Its syntax is this. The if statement will evaluate the condition. If condition is true, then a statement is executed. If condition is false, then a statement is bypassed. Let's switch to BlueJ to see a program that demonstrates if statement in its most simple form. I will open the project which has our if statement program. We want to see the HelloIf class. Let's execute it and correlate the output with the code. First I will compile the class. Then I will make an object of this class. I will keep the default name for the object. Next, I will right-click on the object and execute the demo if statement. We got some output. Now let's go over the code of demo if statement and understand the output that we got. These statements declare two integer variables a and b and assign the values 1 and 2 to a and b respectively. You can declare multiple variables of the same type in a single line by separating them with commas. The next line is an if statement which checks if a is less than b. The condition is true as the value of a, which is 1, is less than the value of b, which is 2. So the println following it gets executed and we see this output on the console. After this, the variable a is multiplied by 2, which gives the result as 2. This 2 is assigned back to a, changing its value from 1 to 2. The next if statement checks if a is equal to b. The condition is true as both a and b are now 2, so the println following it gets executed and we see the second line of output on the console. We again multiply a by 2 and assign it back to a. Now a contains 4. The next if statement checks if a is greater than b. A's value is 4 and b's value is 2. So the condition of if statement evaluates to true as 4 is greater than 2. And the println following it gets executed and we see the third line of output on the console. Next if statement checks if a is equal to b. A is 4 and b is 2, so clearly they are not equal. The condition is false. The println following it is not executed and we don't see the text. This won't be printed on the console. This should give you a basic idea of how if statement works, which is good enough for us to get started. We will revisit the if statement later in the control statements section. The other control statement that we will be looking at now is the for loop. In a programming language, loops are used to execute a set of statements repeatedly until the specified condition is satisfied. Java provides a very rich collection of looping constructs. The most commonly used one is the for loop. This is the syntax of for loop. The initialization portion of the loop sets the loop control variable to an initial value. Initialization happens only for the first time when the for statement is executed, which means that the initialization part of for loop only executes once. One execution of the for loop is called an iteration. Condition in for loop is evaluated on each iteration. If the condition is true, then the statement gets executed. Once the condition returns false, the statement does not execute and the control gets transferred to the next statement in the program after for loop. After each iteration of the for loop, the increment-decrement part of the for loop gets executed and it updates the loop control variable. For loop may sound complicated in theory, but it is quite easy and straightforward to use in practice. So let's look at a program to easily understand for loop. HelloFor class will help us to understand for loop. We have a variable I here which is of type integer. Then we have a for loop which contains a println statement inside it. Let's execute the demo for loop method and see what is the output. As always, first we need to compile the class. For that, I'll go to the main window. I'll right click on the class and select compile. Next, I will create an object of HelloFor class. For that, again, I'll right click on the class and select this option HelloFor. I'll keep the default name for the object and select OK. Now, to execute the demo for loop method, I'll right click on the object and select demo for loop. We got some output. Let me open the class code as well. As you can see, there are 4 output lines on the console, even though our program has only 2 println statements. The reason for this is our for loop. It is repeatedly executing the first println statement 3 times. Let's take a closer look at the program and understand how this output got generated. I is the loop control variable of this for loop. It is assigned a value of 0 in the initialization portion of for loop. This initialization happens only the first time when for loop is executed. Next, the conditional test is performed. The current value of I is 0, which is less than 3, so the condition is true. As the condition is true, the println statement gets executed and we get our first output line on the console. After executing the statement, the increment-decrement part of the for loop is executed, which increments I to 1. With this, the first iteration of our for loop completes. On the second iteration again, the conditional test is performed. I is now 1, but it is still less than 3, so the condition is true and println statement gets executed again. This gives us our second output line with the value of I as 1. Note that initialization part of for loop is not executed again as it is only executed once at the beginning of the first iteration. After executing the println statement, the increment-decrement part of for loop changes the value of I to 2. Like second iteration, at the beginning of third iteration, conditional test is true as the value of I is 2, so it is still less than 3. Println is executed, we get the third output line on the console. Then increment-decrement part of for loop changes the value of I to 3. At the beginning of fourth iteration, the conditional test is performed. Value of I is now 3. That means I is no longer less than 3, so the condition becomes false. As the condition is false, println statement is not executed and program control moves to the statement after the for loop. In our case, it is this println statement and we see the output, now you know for loop on the console. Okay, so now that we have looked at the for loop, won't you agree with me that for loop is quite simple and straightforward in practice? That's all I had in this video. It's time to wrap up. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Now that we have our feet wet with a few short Java programs, it is time to start going deeper and understand the concepts in detail. In this video, we will look at code blocks and tokens, which are the fundamental unit of all Java programs. You can group 2 or more statements together by enclosing them between opening and closing curly braces. Such a group of statements is called a code block. Consider code block as a logical unit that can be used at any place where a single statement can. The best way to demonstrate code blocks are the if and for statements we just learned. So let's go to BlueJ and see code blocks in practice. In this program, we have replaced the single statement after if with a code block containing multiple statements. Let's execute it. Go back to the main window and compile the class. Next, create an object of the class. Now use this object to execute the demo if with code block method. Let me bring back the code of the class on the top. Here A is less than B, so the condition is true. The target of if statement is a code block, so all the statements within the code block gets executed. Had the condition been false, none of the statements in the code block would get executed. Let me change the less than to greater than sign. This makes the condition false and now nothing should be printed. I will clear the output of the console window before heading ahead with the execution of the program. Go back to the main window and compile the class again. Create the object of the class. and again execute the demo if with code block method. As expected, nothing gets printed on the console window. The block of code behaves as one logical unit as the target of the if statement. Either all the statements in the code block gets executed or nothing is executed. Similarly, code block can be the target of for loop too. Let's see an example of that as well. In this program, the target of for loop is this code block containing these three statements. Let's run this program. As you can see in the output, in each iteration of the for loop, all the three statements inside the code block get executed. Code blocks are used at many other places in the program apart from if statement and for loops, and they have some additional properties as well, which we will see later. The most important thing to remember about code blocks is that they are used to create logically inseparable units of code. Moving on to tokens, all Java programs are composed of tokens. A token is the smallest element of a program that is meaningful to the compiler. The different type of tokens in Java are identifiers, literals, operators, separators, keywords. Except operators, we will look at the other tokens now. Operators we will be discussing in a separate video. Before starting our discussion on tokens, let's first understand how Java handles whitespace. Java is a free-form language. It doesn't enforce any special indentation rules for its programs. Let me show you what I mean by this. I will remove all the white space and write this program on a single line. It compiles without any errors. Let's execute it now. It successfully executes. All the new lines and formatting are for improving the readability of programs. A properly formatted program is much easier to read and understand as opposed to when all the code is on a single line. The compiler, however, doesn't need all these white spaces to properly compile the program. In fact, compiler ignores all the white space in your program. In Java, white space includes space, tab, and new line. The first type of tokens that we will look at are the identifiers. In general, programming languages make use of identifiers for identifying all the different things in the program. In Java, identifiers are used to name things like classes, objects, variables, arrays, functions, etc. Java has some rules for forming identifiers. The first rule says that an identifier can be a sequence of alphabets, digits, underscore, and $sign character only. To give a few examples, all these identifiers, student name, roll number, Java for champs, $1 to $10, underscore subject, are valid identifiers as they are a combination of alphabets, digits, underscore, and $sign characters only. The second rule says that identifiers cannot start with a digit. So second and 20_20 are invalid identifiers as they start with a digit. As per the third rule, an identifier must not be a keyword or a boolean or null literal. We haven't talked about keywords and literals yet. This rule will become clear after we discuss about them. For now, just keep in mind that keywords, boolean literal and null literal can't be used as identifiers. The examples shown under this rule are invalid because class and static are keywords, true and false are boolean literals, while null is the null literal. One very important thing to keep in mind is that Java is case sensitive. I'm repeating this point again as beginning programmers make many mistakes due to this. Let's understand this with an example. Let's say you declare a variable in your program as student marks like this. Note that S here is small. Later in your code, when you want to use this variable, you write it like this. Note that S in this case is capital. You will get an error for undefined variable student marks. Since Java is case sensitive, this student marks is different from this student marks, which is different from this student marks. For Java, these are three different identifiers. So watch out for the case of your identifiers and don't let this problem happen to you. The next type of tokens are literals. Any constant value which can be assigned to the variable is called as literal. Some examples of literals are 500, which is an integer, 3.141, which is a floating point number, a, which is a character, hello, which is a string. There are also two special types of literals, the Boolean literals represented by the words true and false, and the null literal represented by the word null. This is just an overview. I will have a lot more to say about literals after we complete our discussion about data types. Separators help define the structure of a program. There are 9 different types of separators in Java. The first separator is parenthesis. Parentheses are used at multiple places in Java. The parameters that a method can accept are enclosed within a set of parentheses in the method definition. While calling the method, the values of these parameters are also enclosed within parentheses. This use of parentheses will become clearer after our discussion of functions. The next place where parentheses are used is the expressions in control statements. We briefly looked at this during our discussion of if and for statements. We will revisit it again when we will discuss control statements in detail. The other places where parentheses are used are defining precedence in expressions and surrounding cast types. These usages will become clear after operators and data types discussion. Next separator is the braces. It is most commonly used for defining code blocks, which we saw earlier in this video. It is also used to contain values of automatically initialized arrays. Next separator is brackets. It is mainly used in arrays to declare array types and dereference array values. We will see its use in detail when we will discuss arrays. Next is comma. It is used to chain statements together inside a for loop. It also separates successive identifiers in variable declarations. Period is used to separate package names from sub-packages and classes. It is also used to select a field or method from an object. Semicolon is the most commonly used separator in Java. It is used to terminate statements. As you have seen in the program so far, Java compiler mandates that statements end with a semicolon. I am mentioning these next 3 separators, colons, ellipses, and @sign for completeness. ICSE Computer Applications syllabus doesn't cover them, so they are out of scope for this course. The last token that we will look at is the keyword. A keyword is a word that has a predefined meaning in the language. Due to this, keywords can't be used as names for variables, methods, classes, or any other identifier. Java language specification defines 61 keywords. The complete list is shown here. Underscore is a special case here. It was added as a keyword in JDK 9. Just by itself, it is considered a keyword and can't be used as a variable name. But Java will allow you to use it when it is combined with other characters. Let's look at a program to understand it. In the method demo underscore, here I have used only underscore as the name of an int variable. This line is marked an error. Let's look at the error message. The error message clearly tells us that underscore is a keyword added in release 9, so it can't be used as an identifier. Here I am using underscore in combination with other characters to name my integer variables. The compiler has no issues with these lines. It is not showing any error here. I will comment out the 2 lines where I have used just underscore as the variable name. I will compile and run this class. The class compiles fine now. Let me create an object of keyword demo class. Now I'll use this object to run the demo underscore method. The method executes without any issues. So just by itself, underscore is an identifier and can't be used to name variables. But when combined with other characters, it can be used in variable names. Coming back to the list of keywords, the keywords const and goto are reserved but not used. So what could be the reason for reserving them? These keywords are used in C++. Reserving these keywords as keywords in Java helps the compiler to produce better error messages. If a programmer coming from C++ background uses these keywords incorrectly in Java, then the compiler can provide appropriate error messages to the programmer. You don't need to learn these keywords by heart, but it is good to have an idea about which words are reserved as keywords, because you can't use them as variable names in your programs.